I'm Amelia Warren, 32 years old, and 4 years ago, I became the CEO of my grandfather's company. I had no idea that falling in love would put that legacy at risk. When Adam and I stood at the altar, I thought I'd made peace with the secret I was keeping. But the day after our honeymoon, his mother showed up at our door, not with flowers or hugs, but with a notary, a briefcase, and a stack of legal documents. I didn't know it yet. But the moment she sat down on my living room couch was the moment everything would change before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if you've ever had to protect something important from the people closest to you, go ahead and tap that like and subscribe button. I was raised in St. Paul, Minnesota by two working parents who believed in three things: hard work, honesty, and keeping your word. My mother was a nurse, my father a postal carrier, and we didn't have much, but they taught me the value of earning your way. I spent most summers with my grandfather Thomas Warren, who ran a small cybersecurity company from a cramped office downtown, while other kids rode bikes or went to camp. I sat next to Grandpa learning how to read balance sheets, write customer emails, and ask better questions when things didn't go as planned. When I was 10, he told me, "Business isn't about money, it's about solving problems and building trust. Protect what you build, because not everyone will want to see you succeed." I never forgot that I studied computer science in college and spent every Sunday on the phone with Grandpa, reviewing case studies and real-time issues from his company. After graduation, I joined Warren Security Systems and worked my way up from support calls to development to operations. I earned every promotion, and when I was 28, he passed unexpectedly and left the company to me. It was worth $5 million. Then 78 employees, 30 clients, and a whole lot of pressure to prove myself, especially as a young woman, in a field where most rooms were full of older men. In those first months, I cried in my car more than once, but I kept showing up, hired new people, restructured our service packages, and doubled down on protecting small businesses, the ones no one else was serving. 4 years later, we'd tripled our value to $15 million, opened a second office in Dallas, and built our own detection platform. I still lived in a 2-bedroom condo with an old Audi and wore jeans to meetings when I could, because flashy wasn't my style. Grandpa used to say, "Money is a tool, not a trophy," and I lived by that. I also kept my success private too many times. I'd trusted the wrong person. Jason cheated on me with my roommate in college. Eric borrowed $8,000 for a business deal and vanished. Michael only dated women listed in Forbes, and Daniel talked about joint accounts 3 months in. The moment they found out what I owned, something shifted. I stopped leading with that part of my life. Instead, I told people I worked in tech, which was true. I just didn't say I owned the company. When I met Adam Clark at a wedding in Duluth, I noticed him sitting alone grading papers while everyone else danced. He taught high school history, coached the debate team, and spoke about his students like they were the most important people in the world. He drove an old Honda, wore the same worn boots to every date, and got excited about used book sales. He never asked where I worked, just what I loved about it. And when he invited me over for dinner, he cooked spaghetti, served it with dollar store wine glasses, and told me, "Happiness isn't about stuff, it's about purpose." I wanted to tell him the truth. But when he shared that his father had left his mother for a corporate executive years ago, something in his voice made me pause. "My mom raised me on a teacher's salary," he said proudly. I learned young that real wealth is measured in impact, not income. I didn't lie. I just let him believe what he saw and told myself I'd tell him eventually. After the ring, after the vows, after it was safe, the more time we spent together, the harder it became to imagine losing him. We made each other better. He gave me space to lead. I gave him room to dream. And for the first time, I pictured a future with someone who didn't care about status, only substance. But there was one constant shadow in the background, his mother. Barbara Clark, she called him daily, had opinions about everything from our weekend plans to what coffee beans we used, and the way she looked at me made something cold settle in my chest. Jenna noticed it too. The first time they met, she leaned in afterward and whispered, "That woman doesn't want a daughter-in-law. She wants a co-pilot, and you're in her seat." But I brushed it off. I was in love. Adam was thoughtful, dependable, and deeply loyal, especially to his mother. And I didn't want to believe that love came with strings when he proposed at the lake where we'd had our third date. I said yes without hesitation. The next morning I called my lawyer and asked how to protect my company, just in case I didn't know it then. But the choice I made to put everything in a trust would be the only reason I didn't lose it all. Barbara started small, just little suggestions about the wedding colors and which church to use. But before long, she was forwarding us contact lists for caterers we hadn't asked for and dress styles I never planned to wear. Adam tried to stay neutral, shifting his weight between me and his mother every time a disagreement came up. But neutrality often meant siding with her, if only to keep the peace, the way he'd been trained to since childhood, when I chose a lakeside venue near where Adam and I first met. Barbara wrinkled her nose and said it seemed excessive and far too modern for a proper family wedding. Adam didn't object when she pushed for his childhood church. Instead, I said nothing, but noted it was the first time a decision had been made for me, without me. She wanted the reception hall draped in silver and pale blue colors she called elegant and traditional. When I mentioned I preferred warm burgundy tones with gold accents, she smiled politely and said of course. But a few days later, she texted Adam a photo of navy and silver table linens with a note that read, "These are much more classic." Don't you think we were barely 2 weeks into planning and already it felt like she was planning her second wedding, not her son's first? The florist she liked was twice the budget we discussed, but she insisted it was worth it for the family. Photos Adam assured me we'd find compromises, but somehow every compromise leaned in her direction. Barbara's comments about money were starting to change too. Not cautious or budget-minded, more like little tests, watching for where the limits were when she saw the ballroom. I had reserved for the reception. She glanced around and asked how we could afford it on a teacher's salary. She didn't say it unkindly, but the tone wasn't curiosity either. It was calculation, I told her. We were splitting the costs, which technically wasn't a lie. I had told Adam the money came from a modest inheritance from my grandfather. He accepted that explanation without question and agreed to let me handle most of the expenses to reduce the strain on his savings. She brought up honeymoons once while folding invitations at the kitchen table. "Why not Fiji or St. Bart's?" she said, eyes sparkling. "You should go somewhere luxurious, not someplace you'll forget by next year." When Adam mentioned Hawaii, she waved a hand and said, "That was fine too," she supposed. "But if you're going to do it right." I watched her as she said it, trying to understand what she meant by right. Was it about the memories or about the image? The more involved she got, the more I felt myself shrinking into a version of myself. I didn't recognize one night after she left our apartment. I asked Adam if he noticed how often she changed plans we'd already agreed on. He didn't seem concerned. "She's just excited," he said. "You're her only son getting married." I reminded him that I was part of the wedding too. He kissed my forehead and promised that once we were married, things would settle. But it didn't feel like reassurance. It felt like stalling. I started second-guessing every decision I made, not just about the wedding, but about the timing of telling Adam the truth about the company. There were moments where I thought I would say it over dinner, or while we walked home from the grocery store, but each time something stopped me. Mostly, fear not of what he would say, but what it might change in how he saw me. His comments about corporate types and women who care too much about money echoed in my mind, and Barbara's constant hints about shared prosperity didn't help either. We met with the officiant 2 weeks before the wedding, a kind older woman named Reverend Porter who asked about how we'd be handling finances once we were married. Adam smiled and said we'd combine our salaries, live simply, and make decisions together. Nodded along, but my chest ached hearing it. It was the first time I felt like I wasn't just hiding something. I was lying outright. I called Jenna later that night and told her everything: the company, the trust, the prenup, even the growing dread that was curling inside me like smoke. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You either tell him now or you let Barbara find out first and use it against you." I asked how she would even find out, and Jenna didn't answer right away, just said, "Some people have a way of sniffing out the things they're not supposed to know." I didn't sleep well after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Barbara going through our drawers or overhearing a call I shouldn't have taken. Then the rehearsal dinner came, and that image turned into something far more real. The room was filled with soft music and candlelight, friends from college and Adam's extended family, clinking glasses and laughing through shared memories. Barbara stood up toward the end, raised her champagne, and began her toast with a smile that looked polished but not warm. She wished us happiness and health, then added that in the Clark family, we believe in sharing everything, especially prosperity. That line hung in the air like perfume too strong to ignore. I caught Caroline's eye from across the room. She had come as a friend, not as my attorney, but the moment our eyes met, I could see she heard it too. Later, she pulled me aside and asked if Barbara had ever expressed unusual interest in my finances. I told her not directly, but enough that I had been paying attention. "Good," Carolyn said. "You've done everything right, but stay sharp that night before bed." I tried once more to tell Adam the truth, but he was tired, talked about how perfect the night had been and how excited he was for the next morning. I sat in silence watching him drift to sleep, knowing the clock had nearly run out. When I woke up the next day, my dress hung near the window, catching the morning light. The church, where we'd be married, stood waiting with its brick walls and stained glass that Barbara had insisted on, and Adam would be standing there too in the suit we picked out together, smiling the way he always did when he saw me walk into a room, and I would be walking down that aisle, with the truth still tucked away in my pocket. The morning after we got back from Hawaii, I stood at the kitchen counter making coffee, still half in vacation mode. Adam scrolled through photos on his phone from our trip, smiling at nothing in particular when he told me his mom was stopping by around 11. I didn't think much of it. She said she had a wedding gift to drop off, something too delicate to bring to the reception. I glanced at the clock and said that was fine. We were both off work and hadn't unpacked yet. At exactly 11, the doorbell rang. Adam opened it to find Barbara dressed in her Sunday best. Carrying a neatly wrapped box behind her stood a man in a dark gray suit holding a leather briefcase. "Good morning, Barbara," said, stepping inside before we could invite her in. "This is Mr. Patterson. He's a notary, public, helping with some family paperwork today." Adam looked confused, but nodded slowly as they settled onto the couch. I brought coffee out to the living room, thinking maybe this was about a family heirloom or some kind of legal formality. Barbara didn't let the silence stretch long. "Amelia," she said, folding her hands neatly in her lap, "it's time we had a real conversation." I looked over at Adam, but he just stared at her, waiting. Then she turned back to me, her tone changing from polite to pointed. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out about Warren Security Systems, about the company you've been hiding from my son?" Adam turned to me, the shock plain on his face. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Barbara lifted her chin. "I asked a friend to run a background check when Adam told me he was serious about you. Imagine my surprise when we discovered you weren't just some employee in tech, but the CEO of a multi-million-dollar business." I set my coffee down slowly. "You had me investigated?" I asked. She waved a hand protectively. I looked into the woman marrying my only son. That's called love, not spying. Adam's face had gone pale. Amelia, is this true? I nodded. I inherited the company 4 years ago. I was planning to tell you after the honeymoon before I could explain further. Barbara gestured to Mr. Patterson, who quietly opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. These papers, she said, are to transfer ownership of your company to the Clark Family Trust. I laughed once, soft and disbelieving. You can't be serious. Barbara gave a tight smile. You're married now. What's yours is Adam's and what's Adam's belongs to this family. That company is marital property. Whether you disclosed it or not, these papers make that official. Mr. Patterson looked uncomfortable, shifting slightly in his seat. I cleared my throat. The company is in a trust established before the marriage. I said clearly it remains my separate property. This paperwork is meaningless. Barbara turned to Adam gently. This woman hid her wealth, lied to you for 2 years, and now wants to keep everything separate, just like your father's second wife did. Don't let history repeat itself. Adam didn't respond right away. His face was blank, unreadable. Finally, he turned to me, his voice low. You've been running that company this whole time. I nodded again. Yes, I wanted to protect what my grandfather built. I didn't want our relationship to be about money. Barbara cut in sharply. Convenient story, she said. You married him without telling him the truth. That's deceit. I turned to Adam, hoping he would see how manipulative this all was. But he just sat there, stuck between loyalty and disbelief. Mr. Patterson looked down at the papers, quietly gathering them, as if hoping to disappear into the cushions. I will not be signing anything, I said. Standing now, the company stays with me. Barbara's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed. We're not forcing anyone, she said. We're just making sure Adam's future is secure. She looked back at him, reminding him of the years she'd worked 2 jobs, the loans she took out for his college. She painted pictures of renovated kitchens, new cars, vacations they never could afford. This is your chance to have the life you deserve, she said softly. Adam's eyes stayed on the floor. I tried again. Adam, this isn't about fairness. It's about control. This company employs 78 people. It's not a prize to be traded in a marriage. It's part of who I am. He finally looked up at me, his voice strained. I don't know what to say. I just need time to think. Barbara wasn't finished. If she won't sign, we'll take this to court, she said. I've already spoken to attorneys. Fraud is a real claim when someone hides assets before marriage. I shook my head quietly, amazed by the audacity of it all. Adam asked me barely above a whisper, Did you pay for the wedding for the house? I nodded. Not to hold it over him, but because there was nothing left to hide, I wanted us to start without financial pressure. Barbara didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her voice calm and cold. This is your choice, Amelia, sign the papers, or risk your marriage. She motioned toward the notary, who now looked visibly unsettled. I can't notarize under duress, he said softly. It would be illegal. Barbara didn't acknowledge him. She looked at me and waited. I turned to Mr. Patterson. Thank you for your time. I think it's best you leave now. Barbara stared at Adam as he stood up, finally facing her mom. You need to go. We need to talk privately for a moment. She looked at him as if he had struck her. Then, without another word, she gathered the papers and left Mr. Patterson trailing awkwardly behind her. The door clicked shut, and the room fell silent. Adam and I stood on opposite sides of the living room, still dressed in vacation clothes, surrounded by unopened suitcases and the scent of Barbara's perfume. He looked at me not with anger, but with something deeper. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, and in that moment I knew our real conversation was just beginning. Adam sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped between his knees. his eyes fixed on the floor between us. The house was silent, except for the hum of the fridge down the hall. We hadn't unpacked yet. The suitcase from our honeymoon still leaned against the wall by the stairs. Untouched, I stood across the room waiting for him to speak. When he finally looked up, his voice was quieter than I expected. "Why didn't you tell me?" I sat down slowly, leaving space between us. Not because I wanted it, but because it felt necessary. I tried to explain that it had never been about the money. It was about trust. My past relationships hadn't ended well, and when we met, he felt different. I didn't want that to change. I thought I'd have more time to tell him that once we were married, once everything felt more settled. Adam listened without interrupting, but his expression didn't soften. I thought we told each other everything he said. "You let me build a life." With you around a story that wasn't complete, he wasn't shouting. He didn't need to be the hurt in his voice said. "Enough, I know," I said. "And I was going to tell you after the honeymoon. I hesitated too long." He looked away again and ran a hand through his hair. Something I'd seen him do a dozen times when he was overwhelmed at work or frustrated by a debate tournament gone sideways. Then he asked if I had known Barbara would do something like that. I told him the truth. No, not like that. I knew she had strong opinions and that she struggled with boundaries. But I never imagined she'd show up with legal documents and a notary. He didn't say anything for a long time. Eventually he stood up. "I need some space," he said. "I need time to think," and just like that, he went upstairs. I stood in the middle of our living room, unsure if I should follow him or let him go. In the end, I packed a small bag and booked a hotel downtown. I left a note on the counter telling him where I'd be if he wanted to. That night, I called Caroline and told her everything. She didn't hesitate. That was attempted coercion. She said it might even fall under financial fraud. We should file a report. I told her I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't looking for a courtroom. I just wanted to understand if our marriage had a future. Caroline agreed, but urged me to come in the next morning to strengthen the legal protections around the company. And we did just that. The meeting was short but thorough. Caroline walked me through additional steps we could take, updated some documents, and made sure everything was in place. Just in case, she also handed me a folder. Her paralegal had prepared with Barbara's public financial records. It showed 2 maxed-out credit cards, a second mortgage on her house, and a recent lien filed by the IRS. It didn't excuse anything, but it helped explain it. Barbara hadn't just been meddling. She was drowning and saw my company as a life raft. That afternoon, I sat in the hotel room reading and rereading Adam's texts. The first one came that night. "I'm still trying to understand why you kept this from me the next day." He said, "Mom keeps calling. She says she was protecting me. I don't know what to believe." The third message was softer. "I miss you. Can we talk in person on the 4th day? We met at a coffee shop not far from our house." Adam looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well. His coffee sat untouched between us for a while. Neither of us said anything. Then he told me he had spoken to Barbara, really spoken to her for the first time since the confrontation. She admitted everything: the debts, the desperation, the belief that she was acting in his best interest. Adam said he felt ashamed, not just for how she behaved, but for not standing up to her sooner. He admitted that he'd let her influence his choices for too long, that her expectations had shaped his decisions more than he ever realized. I reached across the table and took his hand gently. He didn't pull away. He said he was angry, that I had hidden the truth, but also angry at himself for not defending me when it mattered most. "We both made mistakes," I said, "and I meant it." He nodded. "I didn't marry you for your money, Amelia. I married you because you make me better, because you challenge me and believe in me. And I want to rebuild what we had. I told him we could, but it had to be different. We needed boundaries, real ones, and honesty without exceptions." Adam agreed. He'd already told Barbara she needed to respect our marriage, or she wouldn't be part of our lives anymore. He said it was the hardest conversation he'd ever had with her, but he knew it was necessary. We talked for hours that day about everything, about how to move forward, what we needed from each other, what it would take to rebuild trust. By the time we left the coffee shop, we had a plan. Couples therapy to help us navigate the damage, family therapy with Barbara. If she agreed, and full transparency between us financially and emotionally, that night I came home for the first time since the notary incident. Adam welcomed me in and helped me unpack my bag. The house still felt heavy, but not as tense as before. The next evening, he asked if I would tell him more about the company, what it really looked like day to day, what I did, who was on my team, so I did. I showed him the operations board, explained the new software we were developing, told him about my weekly meetings and quarterly planning and the goals we'd set for the next fiscal year. He listened carefully, asked questions, and when I finished, he just said, "You're incredible, what you've built. Your grandfather would be proud." His words didn't erase what happened, but they mattered. They opened a door that had been closed for too long. We started couples therapy that week, and every session helped us dig a little deeper into the reasons behind our choices, the habits we'd learned from our families, and the fears that had gone unspoken until now. We had a long way to go, but for the first time in days, it felt like we were moving forward together. Adam showed up to our next therapy session with a yellow notebook tucked under his arm, the same kind he used when coaching debate. In it, he'd written out a list of boundaries he wanted to establish with his mother. Not to punish her, he said, but to protect our marriage. He read them aloud quietly, but clearly Barbara would no longer be allowed to visit unannounced. She couldn't weigh in on our finances or expect to be involved in private decisions between us. And if she crossed those lines, we'd take space until she respected them. He wasn't angry while he spoke, just steady and calm. And when he was done, he looked at me and asked if I had anything to add. I did. I asked for full transparency on both sides. Not just about money, but about emotions, disappointments, worries, the things we had both learned to hide from the people we loved, to keep the peace after the session. We walked home slowly, neither of us in a hurry to break the quiet. When we got back, Adam made dinner, nothing fancy, just grilled chicken and salad, but he brought it to the table like it was a peace offering, and we sat across from each other, plates between us and no more secrets in the air. The next week, Barbara called twice, both times. Adam let it go to voicemail. The third time she texted, asking if she could come by to talk in person. Adam told her he would meet her at a coffee shop instead, somewhere public, somewhere neutral. She agreed, and I waited at home, trying not to imagine what she might say when Adam returned. An hour later, he looked more tired than angry. "She doesn't think she did anything wrong," he said. But she agreed to give us space for now, and she knows where the line is. A few days later, I invited Barbara to my office, not out of obligation, but because I needed her to see what the company really was. It wasn't a vault full of cash or some private kingdom. It was a group of people solving hard problems day after day, building something that mattered to small businesses who couldn't afford to be hacked. I showed her the servers, the conference room, the quiet hum of focused work, then sat with her in my office as the sun came through the windows. "This company is my grandfather's legacy," I said. "It's also the livelihood of 78 employees, people with families and rent and student loans." Barbara didn't say much at first, just sat there quietly looking around. Eventually she folded her hands and said, "I behaved badly, and I thought I was protecting Adam. But the truth is, I saw an opportunity, and I took it." She didn't cry, she didn't apologize more than once. But it was something, and for Barbara that was more than I expected. Adam noticed the change, too. She still called, but less often, and she stopped asking about our finances completely. Instead, she joined a book club, started volunteering at a local literacy program, and even went on a few lunch dates with a retired professor named Dan. After that first one, she called Adam, just to tell him she'd met someone. Interesting not to ask for advice or approval, but to share and let go. Our home started to feel lighter, not just because of Barbara's distance, but because we were different too. Adam asked more questions about the company, not to control it, but to understand. He wanted to know what made our software different, what kind of challenges we were facing, and what my goals were for the next few years. When I showed him our growth plan, he smiled and said, "You're running this like a captain, not a boss," and I liked seeing that. Caroline checked in often just to make sure things were still stable, legally. She didn't think Barbara would make another move, but we kept safeguards in place just in case. Adam and I kept our finances mostly separate, but we opened a joint account for household expenses and planned our future with clear lines and shared goals. He suggested that if something ever happened to me, part of the company's assets could be earmarked for education, nonprofits, and he'd help manage that if needed, not as a stakeholder, but as a steward of something he respected. Around our 6-month anniversary, we invited friends over for a small dinner. Nothing fancy, just good food and music in the backyard. At one point, I looked around and saw Adam leaning against the fence, laughing with one of my colleagues from the tech team. The light caught his face just right, and he looked peaceful, like he finally fit in both worlds, the one he came from and the one we were building together. The next morning, he brought coffee to the bedroom and said, "I've been thinking about that moment in therapy when you said you used to hold back because you were afraid of being seen. I've been doing the same thing, just in different ways." I asked what he meant, and he said, "I always felt like I had to protect my mom to be useful or needed, and when I couldn't fix her problems, I felt like I failed. But with you, I don't feel that weight. I just feel like I belong." I didn't say anything right away, just reached for his hand and held it, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like there was nothing between us. Not guilt, not expectation, just two people who had chosen each other again. The real healing wasn't in the big gestures. It was in moments like that, quiet and ordinary but honest moments that let us both be fully ourselves. 6 weeks into therapy, Adam and I had found a rhythm. We were learning how to hear each other without interrupting, how to name feelings without blaming, and how to talk about the hard things without letting them crack everything open again. The house felt different too, quieter in a way that didn't feel tense, just calm. We cooked together more, sat on the patio after dinner, and shared small things about our days. I told him about a client we'd just signed. He told me about a student who wrote a paper that surprised him. The biggest change, though, was Barbara. She hadn't pushed back against the boundaries Adam set. At least not directly. She called once a week and mostly kept them conversations light, nothing about money or the company or the wedding. Instead, she'd mention a book she was reading or ask about Adam's students. There was still a guardedness between us, but it was no longer hostile, just cautious, like we were both waiting to see if the shift was real. Then one Sunday she showed up again, this time not with a notary, but with an envelope. Adam and I had invited her over for lunch. He grilled chicken, and I made a salad. Barbara brought lemon bars she'd baked from a magazine recipe she'd clipped, and when we finished eating, she pulled the envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. "I had this notarized last week," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "It's not legally necessary, but I wanted it to be clear inside was a signed statement formally acknowledging she had no claim to Warren security systems, that she had acted inappropriately, and that her previous attempts to challenge its ownership were misguided." The words were plain and simple, but they carried weight. "I know it doesn't undo what happened," she said, "but I needed to put it in writing." Adam reached for her hand across the table, and for a long moment, no one said anything. Then he said, "Thank you," and meant it in therapy. The following week, our counselor, Dr. Winters, called it a repair attempt. Not a full apology, but a step toward accountability. It's not always about the language, she explained, but about the intention and the willingness to change future behavior. Adam nodded slowly. "I think she's really trying." I was more reserved but hopeful. Still, we agreed to keep boundaries in place. Just because things were improving didn't mean we were letting our guard down that weekend. I invited Adam to sit in on one of our quarterly company meetings, not as a partner or co-owner, but just as someone curious. He sat near the back, listened quietly, took notes, and afterward told me he'd never realized how much went into the work. "Behind the scenes, you run this like a conductor," he said later. "You're not just making decisions. You're pulling the whole team into harmony." I laughed then, but the compliment stayed with me longer than I expected. We talked more after that about my goals, what I wanted the company to become, not just in numbers, but in values, transparency, fair hiring, internal mentorship programs, things I hadn't really said out loud before he listened. Not as someone trying to fix or take over, but as someone who wanted to understand. One evening after a board call ran long, I came home and found dinner already made. Adam had printed out an article on women in tech leadership and left it on the counter with a note that read, "Just thought, this was cool. Reminded me of you. We still had hard days. Sometimes one of us would slip into old habits, holding something in or assuming too much. But we had better tools now. We could name the pattern before it became a wall between us. Financially, we kept things separate but added a joint account for shared goals, vacations, home maintenance donations." Adam suggested we update our wills and beneficiaries too, not because we expected anything to happen, but because it felt like the right thing to do. We agreed that the company would remain. Mine held in the trust with Adam as a named successor only in the event of incapacity. And even then, with oversight from Caroline and a small board we established just for that purpose, Adam didn't hesitate or question it. "This feels right," he said. "You built this. I'm just proud to be beside you." We toasted with iced tea on the back porch that night, watched the sun go down, and for the first time since the honeymoon, it felt like the life we'd planned was real. The following Monday, Barbara called not for help or advice, but to share that she'd signed up for a financial counseling program and started working part-time at a local bookstore. She'd also started seeing Dan again, the retired professor from her literacy group. They were taking things slow, she said, but he made her laugh. Adam smiled when he got off the phone with her. "She's figuring it out," he said, and I could tell it meant something deep to him, to see her taking responsibility, not just for what she'd done, but for how she wanted to live. Going forward, things weren't perfect, but they were moving, and sometimes that was enough. 3 months after that Sunday lunch, Adam suggested something I hadn't expected. He wanted us to invite Barbara to join us for family therapy. He'd been thinking about it for a while. He said not to reopen old wounds, but to try and understand them better. He hoped that if she could hear from a professional how her choices had affected both of us, maybe the walls between them would start to come down. I wasn't sure at first, but Dr. Winters thought it was worth a try. She referred us to Dr. Martinez, a family systems specialist who could guide that kind of conversation, someone who understood how patterns repeat themselves unless they're named and worked through. Barbara was hesitant, but she agreed to come the first session, felt stiff. She sat with her arms crossed, her voice firm as she explained she had only ever tried to protect her son. Any mother would have done the same. Dr. Martinez listened carefully, then said, "Protection can come from love, but sometimes what we call protection is really control, and control is driven by fear, not love." Barbara didn't speak for a while after that, just nodded slowly and looked down at her hands. Over the next few sessions, she began to share more, not defensively, but with reflection. She talked about what it had been like when Adam's father left, how quickly everything had fallen apart, how she'd scrambled to keep the lights on while pretending things were fine for Adam. She admitted that money had always felt like safety, and that when Adam married someone she thought had more than they were letting on, she panicked. "I had spent so long being the only person looking out for him," she said quietly. When you came along, it felt like I was being pushed out, like if I didn't hold on, I'd disappear. Adam didn't answer right away, but I saw his posture change. He wasn't bracing anymore, just listening in another session. Barbara admitted that bringing the notary wasn't just about protecting Adam. It was also about fear of losing everything. She had convinced herself that if she could secure a portion of the company, she'd never have to worry again. It was irrational, she said, and unfair and not at all the woman she wanted to be. That moment shifted something between us, not entirely, but enough to open a new door for the first time since the wedding. I looked at her and didn't see threat. I saw someone trying. Even if she'd started late, Dr. Martinez guided us through the next steps, setting boundaries that worked for everyone and identifying when Barbara's old habits started to resurface, because they still did. Sometimes she'd make a comment about how we could invest our money or suggest we refinance the house for a renovation. But Adam stayed firm each time, gently but clearly reminding her that those choices were ours, not hers. Then one afternoon, Barbara came by again, not with papers or baked goods, but with a notarized letter of her own. Her second, this one more personal than legal. It included a full written apology, not just to me but to Adam, acknowledging how her behavior had strained our marriage and nearly fractured their relationship. She also included a statement relinquishing any future claim to our company or joint assets. No one had asked her to do it. She said she just wanted to put it in writing. I thanked her and tucked the letter away, not because I needed legal protection anymore, but because it marked something real, a turning point from suspicion to respect, even if it would always be cautious. That same month, I invited Adam to join our strategy planning retreat for war and security, not as a decision maker, but just to see the bigger picture. He sat in on a few breakout sessions, asked thoughtful questions, and afterward told me he was blown away not just by what we were building, but by how seriously my team took the work when we got home, he said. I always knew you were smart, but I don't think I realized how much people rely on you, how much you carry, and you carry it well. He paused, then added, Your grandfather would be proud of what you've done, not just with the company, but with how you've protected it, without closing yourself off. I didn't answer right away, just leaned into him and let that sit for a while. Later that night, we finalized a new financial agreement, one that included legacy planning for the company and charitable contributions to education-focused nonprofits. Adam had suggested the idea weeks earlier, saying he wanted to be part of building something that gave back. We agreed to maintain separate ownership of the company, but included Adam as a future advisor in case of emergency. Along with Caroline and a second trustee from my board, we structured it carefully so the roles were supportive, not managerial, and everything was reviewed by a third-party attorney. This feels like us, Adam said, when we signed the documents, not just protecting assets, but building something rooted in trust and mutual purpose outside of work. We spent more time together without distraction, cooking on weeknights, walking the dog on weekends, hosting quiet dinners with friends. No drama, no tension, just life moving forward in steady steps. Barbara called less frequently, but when she did, it wasn't to interfere. She'd share a story from her bookstore job or ask for a good documentary recommendation. Sometimes she mentioned Dan, the retired professor. They'd been going to Sunday lectures together and talking about maybe taking a trip up the coast in the fall. I never thought I'd say this. Adam told me one evening, but that notary visit might have been the best thing that ever happened to us. Not the way it happened, but what it forced us to face, and I knew exactly what he meant. Looking back now, I realize how far we've come. What began with suspicion and mistrust ended in something steadier, not perfect, but stronger. Barbara no longer hovers over our choices, and Adam and I have found a rhythm that belongs only to us. I see it in small ways, like the evenings we spend cooking together when the kitchen fills with laughter instead of tension, or when I catch Adam smiling at me across a room full of friends, as if he's remembering how close we came to losing this. Barbara still calls now and then, but the conversations are lighter. She talks about her lectures with Dan, the book she's reading, or the trip she hopes to take. She doesn't pry into our finances anymore, and she hasn't mentioned contracts or notaries since that final letter one Sunday. She joined us for dinner. She brought a pie from scratch, and instead of trying to prove anything, she simply asked about my work. She listened as I told her about the new contract we'd signed, and for once I felt her pride, rather than her fear. Later that night, Adam wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "We're okay, aren't we?" I nodded because we were more than okay. We had carved out something real, something resilient, not because it was easy, but because we chose to keep trying. I've learned that boundaries don't push people away. They allow relationships to breathe, to grow, in a way that feels safe for everyone. Trust isn't built in grand gestures, but in steady steps and honest conversations. Even when they're hard, justice in this story didn't look like a dramatic victory in court or a sudden reversal of fortune. It looked like respect finally being given where it had long been withheld. It looked like a marriage standing firm despite the storms around it, and a mother learning that love doesn't mean control. Life has a way of testing the very things we value most. But sometimes those tests become the doorway to something better, and sometimes healing comes not in sweeping change, but in the quiet daily choice to show up differently. And so that's where I'll leave it with gratitude for the lessons we didn't ask for but still received. If you've ever faced something similar, I hope you know it's never too late to stand firm and never too late for relationships to change. Thank you for listening to my story. If it spoke to you, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need the reminder too. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, I'd love for you to stay connected.